are team 4, and the theme 4 was strategies for getting into the mobile future. So the analogy that was used here is we're kind of like what was happening in the 80s on the PC, where this convergence when a lot of things are coming together, and how do we conduct research in this rapidly changing environment, and how do we do it in such a way that we can make sure that what we do and our findings are valuable into the future when this is changing so much. So we talked a bit about methodological tools more than technical tools. So we looked at how do we identify trends and understand the stable motivations and goals. So what is it that people are doing in their activities, and what are their goals, and how do we get a deep understanding of what those are and can project those into the future. So that was kind of the thread. And so we started by looking at what we do already, which is we've all done lots of different kinds of studies of different sizes, and there's lots of data out there. It's in lots of different forms. It's measuring different things. So we looked at how can we kind of come up with a standard set of measures that we can all start to track to. So those could be behavioral and motivational measures, and that would require a lot of cooperation across different organizations and different academic organizations and open sharing of information. But if we could come up with a standard set of measures, and maybe that is a top 10 that is across all different domains, sort of a golden standard, and then specific measures in each domain that would come up with. And then as we start applying those to each study that we do, a little bit at a time, we can collect standardized data. So as I'm looking at different studies and I'm looking at those measures together, I have a consistent picture of what some of those measures are. And I can share my measures with you as a researcher, and we can have the same kinds of measures. So this all comes together in kind of a common measure and a common knowledge base that people can share, so we can all be looking at those future trends, current trends, and sort of projecting into the future. We also were looking at how you can look at maybe things that you've done already to sort of pull out what some of those measures are. That's the first part of that. And then another point was, if you know what some of those trends are and what some of those behaviors are, you can kind of bootstrap some of the research process. So that was, I think that was your term. Basically, you can try to speed up the coming up to speed part. So rather than doing a longitudinal study that takes 3 months, and the first month is people coming up to speed on a particular behavior, you can kind of know what those behaviors are and train those people somehow, or kind of jumpstart the process. So they're jumping in, a month into the process. So ways of speeding up that kind of knowledge gathering. And that also, that assumes that you already know some things and you're only focusing on the things that are different. So if you know, say, an example would be in location-based services and maps, which is what some of the folks are working on. If you know certain behaviors exist already and you have those documented over time, you really only need to look at the things that are different for that particular research. You can make some assumptions over time. So this requires cooperation amongst companies and researchers, but if we have some standard measures, then we can start to capture those, look into the future, and see where those trends are going to take us going forward.
So continuing on, another kind of core methodology that we discussed that will help us identify these core behaviors and attitudes is doing actual ongoing longitudinal research. And that can be done in a couple of ways. We realize there's the more expensive field study approach, where you do the field study and then every couple of years you're probably repeating it. But then there's also some discount methods that we went ahead and brainstormed, because we realized field study, intensive longitudinal research is quite expensive from a resource and time and labor and all of those core business elements we have to consider. So from a discount methodology, we looked at some self-service forums. We thought, you can look at those from a longitudinal perspective as well. People are self-reporting these things. Talking to call centers, getting their information. People are calling in with issues that they're having, and sometimes we can take that the next step and kind of identify some behaviors and attitudes that possibly could be affecting things. and then also looking at your early adopter group. So these are all some other methodologies that you can look at from a longitudinal perspective to try to get those kinds of information. Then lastly, we went ahead and we really said, we want people to drink their own champagne or eat your own dog food, whichever way you like to say it, but essentially this living lab kind of concept. So you need to have a realistic enough application on, you know, a running device, and really just have people live with it and work with it and, you know, be tethered to it for however long you can get them to commit, or force them if you're an internal person in the company. But really the, you know, the park kind of model where you really just say, I'm going to really understand what's going on and capture all of the information. This really gets at the behaviors and attitudes, because when you live with something that long and that intensive, you are, you know, if something's not fitting, you're going to know by the end of a set period of time. You'll be able to say, ooh, this is breaking someone's mental model, or what their typical behavior would be. You can find out, is it in a good way, something that they would be willing to adopt, or in a not so good way. Because we know the living lab kind of metaphor as a method could possibly be difficult, in this instance you might need to have some more tech-savvy type users, or, you know, plenty of tech support. So, questions?